Hello, I'm Stephan Schwartz, and I want to welcome you to Schwartz Report. I hope you had a lovely Christmas holiday or whatever you celebrated. And we're now getting ready for the new year. I wanted to talk about some things that I have really noted that are happening and are not getting anywhere near the attention they should. I'm speaking here of the growing crisis of food, water, and homelessness that is afflicting the United States. Now, you would think that food and water, which are two of the essentials for life itself, that there might be food and water insecurity in a third world country like Afghanistan or Somalia, but you would hardly think that this sort of thing would be a problem in a country as rich as the United States. And yet, as I'm going to try to share with you, it definitely is. And there is a linkage between food and water insecurity and homelessness that needs to be better understood. These three things are not often linked together, but they should be. They should be. According to the Gallup organization, in a 2019 study that they did, 55% of Americans worry a great deal about hunger and homelessness. And you think about that, 55% of us are thinking and worrying about hunger and homelessness. That's 183,700,000 Americans who are thinking and being concerned about this. I just found that when I came across that research study, that it was unbelievable. I confess. I just couldn't imagine a country this rich that has that kind of numbers of people who are in such insecurity. As I dug deeper into this thing, I discovered that over 500,000 Americans go homeless every single night in the United States. About 65% of them, you can see in the slide, about 65% of them are found in homeless shelters, and another 35%, that's just under 200,000, are found unsheltered on the street or in places that are not really appropriate for human habitation. Parks, cars, abandoned buildings. This is a major problem, and we're not talking about it. We're not doing things about it that we should be doing. I mean, recognizing this linkage, I think, is going to be a critical part of creating well-being in the United States. We need to change the culture. We are not doing what we should and what we once did, really until about the Reagan administration. According to the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Hunger in America research project, you can see this in the slide, almost 29 million adults in the U.S., including a few children shy of 30 million, are food insecure. How is it possible that in a country this wealthy, 59 million people are worried about where they're going to get enough food? As we closed out the year and I was getting ready for Christmas, I was working on the research papers on this, and I just couldn't, I found it hard to believe. And yet, as you know, the Schwartz Report is about facts. It's not about political posturing or philosophies. It's just about objectively verifiable facts. Now, look at this chart about U.S. households with children by food insecurity status of adults and children in 2022, last year that I could get research on this. 17.3% of Americans are food insecure. It's just astonishing. And particularly children. And I just saw one of the red states, Iowa, that they're going to not continue with food programs that help children. And it's in the rural areas, rural states like Iowa, where these problems are really the worst. So you've got 17.3% of the population that is concerned about where they're going to get their next meal. How can that be? And now think about water. According to Asher Rosinger, a professor at the Biobehavior, Health, Anthropology, and Demographic at the University of Penn State, director of the Water Health and Nutrition Laboratory at Penn State, they made a big study of this. And in their new study, they announced that approximately 61.4 million Americans cannot safely drink their tap water as of 2017, 2018, and that the number is growing sharply. And if you know about, for instance, Jackson, Mississippi, a largely Black city capital, but largely a Black city, they have such horrible water problems that most people drink bottled water. And think about what that costs. I mean, that's part of it. Is that all of this is very costly. I don't know what a liter of water in your grocery store would cost, but more than $1. And so if that's what you drink every month, you're spending a significant amount of money, particularly if you're on a very limited budget. Homelessness always involves people facing desperate situations and extreme hardship. Nobody chooses to be homeless. And they have to make hard, very limited choices in the context of whether they can get water, whether they can get food. Again, the Department of Agriculture is saying 59 million adults, just shy of 30 million children are food insecure. We can't feed our children. Every community in the country has families who face this problem, and rural counties are particularly hard hit by this. You don't think about that. You think of it mostly being in the cities, but in fact, most of it is in rural areas. And of course, not surprisingly, given what a racist country we are, hunger in African Americans, Latinos, Native American communities are higher yet because of racial injustice. In order to deal with this hunger, water, homelessness issue, to really get down into it, the root causes are structural and systemic inequalities, largely race-based. Think about that. I see these stories at one-offs, like Flint, Michigan, as I said, or Jackson, Mississippi, cities that you would think would have perfectly good health care and healthy water and enough food, but they don't. And that's the problem. If you live in one of those cities where the pipes were laid down 100 years ago, or they have lead in them, and you have to buy water and you have to deal with sewage, for instance, which we also rarely talk about. Let me give you a statistic about low-income families. The typical low-income family must spend about 12.4% of their disposable income, and that's an increase, to pay for their basic water needs and sewage needs, just to pay for basic water and sewer service. Now, what does 12.4% mean in reality? You read these numbers and 12.4%, I mean, it just kind of goes over your head. What does it actually mean? Well, let me give you an example. As of November 29th, 2022, the average annual pay for an hourly worker in the United States over the course of a year was $42,576. That works out to be about $20.47 an hour. This is the equivalent before taxes of $818 a week, or $3,548 a month. And that means that each month when a person in that situation sits down at their kitchen table or on their desk at home to pay their monthly bills, they write checks for water and sewage totaling $439.95, $440. That's a pretty big chunk to come out of a $3,548 a month income. And yet people are paying that or more. And one of the things that is surprising, I didn't know this till I did this research, is that in the United States, there is no national fundamental right to have access to water. Neither the Constitution nor the Bill of Rights says anything about guaranteeing access to water. And over the subsequent years, the laws of the United States have said many things about water, but not that there is a fundamental right to it. California is the only state that has a state guarantee that access to water is a human right. Amazing. And as I said earlier, we also have, relevant to this, in the cities particularly, but towns too, the water systems, the piping, tends to be on average 45 years old. Some with old iron pipes or pipes with lead in them are over a century. We have not, as a country, been keeping our infrastructure for the well-being of our citizens up to date. Cities like Newark, lead pipe problems, bacteria seeping into the wells, Iowa, sewage backing up into pipes during storms, Milwaukee, nitrates running off of farm fields into the city water system, Las Vegas. And we also, because of changing water situation, we are developing a real water access problem. Now look at this chart. This is the continental U.S., CONUS as it gets reduced to an acronym. These are the percents of areas of U.S. drought in their various categories. And what do you see? 19% have severe drought. 25% have moderate drought. Severe drought, abnormal drought. Water is becoming a real issue. The Mississippi River is drying up to a point where shipping is becoming difficult. The Colorado River, where 7 states depend on it for their water, is drying up. And there's huge struggles going on about who's going to get the water and how much. And also, it's become clear that an awful lot of this water in the Colorado River gets shipped away in the form of alfalfa, places like China. We're not thinking about water in terms of fostering well-being. We don't see it in a holistic way that makes well-being the first consideration. And when you have lack of access to clean water, you've got all kinds of problems about disease, ill health. It increases poverty. It causes problems even in urban areas. Water, food shortage, scarcity, and homelessness. Those 3 things are linked together. And as we get ready to begin a new year, 2024, we need to make a commitment that well-being of the individual and the community is going to be our first priority. What can you do? Well, you can volunteer at one of these food banks that helps children get enough to eat. You can certainly write your congressman and your senator and tell them you think these issues should be a top priority, that getting enough healthy water, building the infrastructure to get that water there, making sure children have enough food to eat. Write them and tell them. And when it comes time in November to vote, quiz the candidates. Where do they stand? Don't let them give you these fuddly answers that you don't quite know what they mean. Ask them. Say to them, I want a clear answer. Are you prepared to work on getting children and adults food? Are you prepared to see that we have decent water? And are you prepared to help with homelessness? And if you don't like their answers, don't vote for them. This has gotten down to the community, to the voter. This is what you should be voting on. These are the things that make a difference to you, your neighbors, people in your neighborhood. We as a people have got to decide that our culture is going to foster well-being, because otherwise the misery and death that flows from these 3 problems, lack of water, scarcity of food, homelessness, are going to do incredible damage. So the question I have for you is, are you prepared to do something about this? We're starting a new year. Can you help? Will you help? That, I think, is the question you ought to ask yourself, and sit down with your family and talk about as we begin a new year. I certainly plan to do that. And I hope you will join me. We need to do this to become a healthy country. So I wish you the very best for the new year. I hope you're safe. I hope you're healthy and everybody in your family is healthy, and that you are not afflicted with these problems, but also that you decide you want to do something about them. If you want to pursue this, as always, you go to the reference I provide, and you can dig further into these questions, and you can find out what I found out and why I felt so strongly about doing this podcast. So thank you. Have a great new year.